Donk Nation, Jackson, Janet's greetings and welcome to your Daily Dose Donkey with Ginger. It's your boy, the Viking Donkey, bringing you some nonsensical Steelers talk in the off season. Little late with this one this week, sorry for that. But, what do we have to talk about? Again, no real news going on in Steelers land. Last week we brought you the best case scenario for the Steelers. This week I'm going to keep it a little shorter, a little sweeter, and we're going to do the worst case scenario for the Steelers, in my opinion. Let's start off with the offense because everyone seems to think, and I seem to think, this will be the linchpin of success. So what's the worst case here for the Steelers on offense? Let's start plain and simple. We'll leave the best for last. We'll start with the offensive line, though. Let's say Broderick Jones doesn't take a step forward. Let's say he was the guy he was last year, which is bottom end starter, but now he's bottom end starter left tackle, right? Let's say that upside doesn't start playing. We don't see the great games. We just see the struggles more so come through. And we're left with a guy who's maybe just a slight upgrade over what Dan Moore Jr. was last year. We go to left guard. Let's say Isaac Seumalo, a guy who's a lot of injuries in his past. He doesn't stay fully healthy this year. He suffers an injury. He doesn't play. And you have a backup coming in, whether it's Spencer Anderson or Nate Herbig or Nick Herbig, with Big Bro Herbig stepping in and doesn't play up to par. Let's say the center position, I don't really think it'll get much worse because of the struggle last year, but let's say Mason Cole was pretty good the year before. Let's say that actually takes a dip off and we only get Mason Cole level production, so we have a black hole pressure up the middle. Let's say right guard, James Daniels really doesn't rebound from the little bit of a struggle he had last year, and he's just a very mid-pack right guard, and we go over to right tackle, and Troy Fontanu or Dan Moore Jr., whoever wins the job, ends up struggling mightily on that right side. That puts a lot of pressure now on the tight ends to stay in as extra blockers to keep this pass rush down, and puts a lot more pressure on the wide receivers now because there's a lot less guys out in routes. So let's get to the tight ends because injuries happen, and that seems to be the thing. Let's say Darnell Washington never grows into a route runner, and his pass blocking, or his run blocking, starts to, stay the same level it was last year or decrease even a little bit. Now we have a struggle there in tight end 2. Tight end 1, Firemouth is dealing with more concussion issues, and when he's on the field, just the seam of big plays still eludes him, right? And he puts up numbers much similar to what he did last year, which in this system isn't going to produce enough. Now we see what the tight ends are doing, and of course Firemouth doesn't take a step forward, but actually takes a step back in his run blocking, and once again shows to be one of the worst run blocking tight ends in football. Then we go ahead and we go to the running backs, and of course take this as it is. It's the worst case scenario, so I'm not saying what I think will happen. We've already went over that. I'm saying what's the worst that can happen, right? Running back wise, let's say Najee Harris, either one of two things happens. Production doesn't increase with the new offense. He stays the same number he's always has, so a very average running back. Or 2, this high mileage he's been getting leads to an injury where he misses half the season or more. And we coat that now, so at best, what we've gotten from Najee. But now we're going to put that in with Jaylen Warren this year. Teams know more about him. They've seen more of him. He's getting a bigger role. And let's say the production slips, and more importantly, the fumble numbers stay the same. And these leads to a lot more turnovers for the offense and a lot of problems. That is leading the Steelers to lean more on the passing game than you would like to see in a defensive team built on an Arthur Smith run first go, which means the wide receivers have to step up. But in fact, every receiver on this team, Van Jefferson, Roman Wilson, Calvin also third, prove they're nothing more than a third or fourth option. Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller. And the Steelers don't have a number 1 receiver because George Pickens doesn't fill into that role. He actually shows that he's a number 2 and puts up decent stats for what would be a number 2 receiver. But they only have a number 2. They don't have a number 1. And they don't have multiple number 2s because none of these other guys step up. I'm talking no receiver outside of Pickens breaks the 600-yard mark, right? Like, we have a bunch of guys in that below 600, above 300 range just because no one stepped up. No one really took it. The Steelers keep trying in and out pieces. and it just doesn't work. And Pickens doesn't take a step forward. His production actually reverts back to, earlier, and takes a step back 1,000 yards. He goes just below it, has more of like the production Deontay Johnson had last year. And that's what we see out of the Steelers offense and the skills in the flat line. And then, of course, we get into worst case scenario, the quarterbacks. And I'm gonna say this: worst case scenario is not even hard to see, right? It's plain and simple. Russ Wilson, Justin Fields are exactly the quarterbacks you've seen the last 2 years from them. The guy who struggled in Denver in Russ's case, and the guy who struggled in Chicago in Justin Fields' case. I don't need to make the case for it. I just had to say, go watch the last 2 years of those guys. And worst case scenario is those guys are exactly who we thought they were. And if that happens, it's going to be hard for the Steelers to take a step forward. Now, let's get to the special teams. Worst case scenario is we get bad balls again, which seems to come once every 4 years, so that like 69% make on the field goals. Our new kickoff rules exploit the weakness in Danny Smith's game. And even with a competent punter now, the problem is Danny Smith, again, schemes up bad things. And just the return, the punt coverage, it isn't up to par. Of course, Miles Killebrew gets injured, and we don't get super teams or super plays on block punts or block field goals because you don't have that guy who was the superstar in it. Now, let's go ahead. Let's walk to the defensive side of the ball. I think the easiest way to say worst case scenario is we'll make it a threefold part. Part one, the addition of Patrick Queen does nothing to improve the Steelers' run defense. They still give up 5+ yards a game against any team that can run the football, and just allow long, sustaining drives, even if they end in field goals. Just keep giving up these 8-9 minute drives that just kill momentum, kill an offense's chance, and doesn't let it go forward. We'll get to level 2, but let's cope on the run defense doesn't improve with TJ Watt gets injured, misses a majority of the season. So now the pass rush is absolutely non-existent because everything that the Steelers seem to succeed with is TJ Watt being otherworldly, still getting 20 sacks while getting double teams, which frees up everybody else. Now all of a sudden TJ isn't there, and the lack of talent on the roster in those positions gets exposed, as a lot of these guys are good complements, but none are standalone pieces, and that's shown to be. And then the secondary. Well, it's really simple to see what the problem is here. We don't get improved plays from the safety. Minka looks exactly like he does last year. Joey Porter stays handsy, but, still a borderline cornerback one because, he has the skill set. He can be there, but he's not a top-tier shutdown guy. He's just a bottom-end cornerback one. Nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that the Steelers trade for Donta Jackson blows up in their face. He is as terrible as he was last year in Carolina. The two young guys don't step up and rush. And I can't think of the other one's name. That Corey Trice, they don't step up. Nothing good goes there. Cam Sutton does get suspended 8 games, and when he comes back, he doesn't get in the groove fast enough. And the secondary is just exploited because there is no pass rush, and these guys are just struggling to keep it together. And in this worst case scenario, I see the Pittsburgh Steelers record at 6-11. Now, we talked about where I feel they'll really finish. We talked about where I think their worst case scenario is and their best case scenario is. So if you'd like to, go ahead, leave me the comments of what you think, how you feel I've missed things, or could it be worse than what I think? If what I think happens, was the record going to be a lot worse than it is with the allegedly super tough schedule we face? And I say allegedly because you never know how things are going to work out in football. But let me know in the comments what you think, where you think the Steelers are going to go, and how you think your worst case scenario for them will play out. Is your worst case scenario a 9-8 season? Is your worst case scenario a 2-win season? Where do you think it's going to go? Who do you think is the person that either bad play or injury will lead to the worst case scenario? If you're curious, for me, I personally think it's the offensive tackles on offense that will lead to worst case scenario for the Steelers, because if you can't get a run game going on the outside and protect the quarterback, you're just done. And for the defense, it's clearly TJ Watt. An injury to him would be the worst case scenario. So go ahead, let me have it. Let me know what you think. Hopefully, we get Laskers or Gingy or maybe Bugaboo back. Or maybe JD in here and get a little take next week. We'll see. Sorry about the lateness again. I will give a shout out, and it's to Charlie Morton of the Atlanta Braves right now. I remember watching him pitch live for the Pirates. Like, this is a that's a dude who's been around for a long time when you consider I haven't been to a baseball game in almost a decade. Like, he's been around pitching for so long and is still doing it successfully. I got to give a shout out there because, that's impressive to see. And the guy who I always enjoyed watching and loved when he became that sinker baller that he is now. But I guess it's time. I'll let you know. I'm the Viking Donkey. That's Viking_Donkey on Twitch and Twitter, the X, that is. Your daily dose of donkey with Ginger is the YouTube channel where you get this fun content. Be sure to tune in. Let me know if there's anything you would like to see put out there to finish up the nonsensical time as we're getting close to being done with nonsense and actual preseason where we get serious again. So Donk Nation, Steeler Nation, love y'all. Wave them if you got them. Here we go.